Good morning, Councillor Krupesh Hirani. It's our pleasure to have you as one of our interviewees for this unique Roots and Changes project. The date today is the 17th of July. I want to start a little bit about your background. Where were you born, and if you can tell us a bit about your ancestry?
Yeah, so I was born and bred in the London Borough of Brent, which is where I represent today, really, at Central Middlesex Hospital, which is not too far from here where we are today at the Brent Civic Centre. My family are of Gujarati origin, so my grandparents were born in India but migrated to Kenya in East Africa. And that's where my mother and father were both born, and they married and moved over to the UK in 1984. So since then, we have been, my family has been in London since they came over from East Africa.
So your grandparents were from Bhuj, Kutch?
Yeah. So we have a region in Kutch where both my maternal and my paternal grandparents are from. They're actually from the same village as well. It's called Gera, and we have a large community from Kutch across northwest London and the wider country, actually. So it's an area which, if you go back there now, you'll find that sort of East and Western culture, because you'll find people over from the UK go back to the villages where their families and their ancestry have come from, and you get that mix and that vibrancy in East and West culture in those villages now.
Do you still in the family speak to each other in Kutchi?
Yeah, so we speak Gujarati. But there's it's a dialect. So just like in England, you'll have different accents and different ways of speaking English. It's the same across in India as well. So the different areas across Gujarat will speak Gujarati in their own different ways. But generally, my grandparents, they all speak Gujarati. So we need to speak and communicate with them in Gujarati. When our parents' generation came over, from whether it was from East Africa or from India, they recognised the importance of culture and language, and many of us, many people from my age group went to Gujarati classes in some of our local temples so that we can learn to read, write, and communicate with our elders.
Part one of our project explored the journey of the Gujaratis from Gujarat to Africa, and we heard some fascinating stories about how they left the shores of Gujarat to go all the way to Africa. And as you say, your grandparents left Bhuj many years ago. Do you have any anecdotes, anything you've heard from them or your parents about their journey?
Yeah, so I think Gujaratis in the UK today, of my generation, are heavily indebted to our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents as well, who made that journey from India to Africa to get that better lifestyle and that better standard of living. So my grandmother is still alive. She's 96 years old, and she still tells us stories about how families would go over to Kenya in boats, and it was so insecure in those days. You don't know if you're actually going to make that journey to the end and reach your destination. But they were very cramped inside those ships, and it was difficult really to know what time of day it was, what was going on, where people had reached, because you're out. We didn't have the navigation systems that we have today, so there was that real uncertainty. So it was really tough, I think, for them to make that step and make that leap, so that we can live that better life today.
How has Britain changed your life and the opportunities you have got living here in Brent?
I was born in Brent, so for me it's not about how being in the UK has changed me. It's about how I have grown up in the UK and how it has changed and shaped and formed my life. And I think Brent is such a wonderful and diverse borough that when you go to school, when you go to work in the borough, when you live in the borough, you get that mix, you get that vibrant community, and you're around people from a range of different backgrounds and a range of different communities. And you learn from each other, but most of all, you learn to respect each other. And in that it's reciprocal. So other people respect you as well, regardless of your background and where you have come from. And I think there's just that much ease in the community where people can live side by side and work side by side with each other and respect one another.
How would you define yourself with your ancestry growing up in this country?
So I describe myself as a British Hindu. My family are also religious minded as well. So they come from a Hindu background. When I've grown up, as I've grown up in the UK, I have lived throughout visiting and worshipping at the local temples across Brent, across northwest London. So I'm very much, I feel at home when I'm at the temples across northwest London. And that's how I would describe myself.
Let's talk a bit about your education. If you can just tell us a bit about where you studied, what you studied.
Yeah, so I went to primary school in Neasden, which is where I live and where I grew up, at Brentcroft Primary School. And secondary school and A-levels I completed at Preston Manor, which is a local school here in Wembley. And following on from that, I think I was really inspired by one of my teachers who really pushed me, encouraged me to do what I wanted to do going forward. And I managed to get a place at Nottingham University studying politics. Which was my first and probably only experience living outside of London. So it was really nice to experience and live in a different part of the country, really. So my education has been very different, I think, very unique in terms of when you look at some of the subjects that people from BAME communities study or look at. Politics isn't really at the forefront, but it's great to see more people now actually reaching out and branching out to other sectors in the economy and also studying what they want to study and making a lifestyle and making a living out of what it is they really want to do.
You hail from a humble immigrant family and background, and you studied it in state schools in Brent. Do you feel studying in the state sector helped you understand the problems faced by society better than if you were from a very privileged background?
I think what you find is that when you being state school educated, I think it just means that you are growing up and living and studying really with people that you live around. I mean, the system in the UK is based on catchment areas largely, so you go around school where you live, and also people around you, they go to the same school as you mostly. So really it just helps you formulate and shape your life, and it just feels real to me. So it's just about making sure that you can live and study and be with your local community, not just before school but after school. One of the things that I remember is actually that journey home from school and that journey to school, and the people that you're with all day. You're walking home with a parent or guardian. So it just creates that closeness in the community. And many of the people that I went to primary school with, I still see, I still remember. Later on, as technology's moved on, we've got social media, so we find that chance to connect with them through social media as well. And it's interesting just to see how people are doing, and that connection that we can still have 20, 30 years on.
It sounds like what you said, that you undertook a a subject like politics, which is very different from what the general Gujarati population takes. But it seems your journey into this political life started from a very young age, and you were involved with was it the British Youth Council or something? Tell us, did that shape your future career path?
Yeah, so I mean, when I was studying for A levels, that's probably when I started to look deeper into politics. I was actually academically I was quite good on the maths and statistics side. So actually for A levels, my chosen subjects were economics, maths, and politics. So two of them very similar if you look at the maths and economics side. But then I really started to grow a passion for politics after learning more and reading more about the system in the UK, how it works, and actually how it's not just people kind of speaking in Parliament or in public about policies, but actually what they're talking about makes a real difference to people's lives. If you look at things like education, like health, even things like roads and transport and policing as well, what decisions and what is said in those chambers actually has a real impact for people in their day-to-day living. So when I started to think more about actually what is it you can do and what can you achieve, then you start to feel actually I want to be a part of that, and I have some ideas, and why can't I be the one that's putting those ideas forward and advocating and pushing for change. So very early on, I mean, after I graduated from university, I started to look for opportunities. What can I do? And I was involved with the British Youth Council, involved in campaigning on issues that are really important to young people. And at the time, we looked at things like the representation of young people in the media. So finding that actually, when you looked at what the media were reporting, it was far easier to find examples of negative reporting of young people than positive, and a lot of that is still true today. And another campaigns we looked at were things like equalizing national minimum wage, because we had different rates depending on what age you are in terms of what you're paid for work, and also the voting age. So I still strongly believe that people from the age of 16 should be able to vote. If they can take part in other activities, if they can join the army, for example, why are they not allowed to vote and have a say in choosing the politicians that decide whether they go to war or not? So really, there are issues that I think that I was passionate about, that resonated, that the British Youth Council were championing, and I was glad to be a part of that to help them campaign.
So were you, as a youngster, did you have the same feelings, or is it a little bit what you're telling us now, the perspective of your work here in the council as a politician?
Yeah. So,
or is it, you know, some people they get into politics because of their own circumstances. Was there something like that?
So I almost see how my development has happened in politics as in two different parts, really, because there are issues that you are passionate about at the national level. So you find that, so when I was campaigning on those issues for the British Youth Council, actually those are issues that are relevant to every young person in the country. But as I started to get deeper into it, I joined the Labour Party, and I started to look at what was happening in my local area as well. And growing up in Neasden, I felt that actually I wanted to do something for the area that I grew up and live in. So I started to get more involved, and then started to actually get more involved with my local party. And then I started to look around at what we had around us, and I felt actually there should be more happening. There should be more resources put into places like parks and open spaces around where I live, or the standards at the local schools need to improve, or the town centre actually needs a lot more investment and actually needs a bit of attention in terms of policing to look at the crime and antisocial behaviour in the area. So that's when I started to actually look more at the local and how it can immediately impact those who are living around me, as well as myself, to be honest.
Why Labour Party?
So generally, if you look across the world, there are two lines of thought or two lines of politics across the Western world. That's left-wing politics or right-wing politics. And generally, in terms of left-wing politics across the world, really, you'll have parties that believe in that distribution of wealth, that fairness, that justice, equality, and the fact that actually the state has a role to play in supporting people and shaping their lives as well, and intervention is needed when it's not possible to get that equality and justice across society. And the Labour Party is the party in this country that is definitely standing for those values, and it met my values as well as an individual, which is why I decided to join the party. But also personally, I could see around me the country as well, and how the Labour Party in government had positively impacted my life. So if I think about going back to primary school and my life at Brent Primary School, I remember going to school and actually the toilets at the school being outside. So in the cold, children had to leave the classroom and go to huts or porta cabins outside just to use the toilet facilities. And in 1997 we had a huge election in this country where we saw the incoming of a Tony Blair government, which started to see that investment into schools. And live as I saw it, I started to physically see the changes in our schools, see that investment into public services. And actually it showed that there was a government that cared about people who don't go to private school or don't go to schools in richer areas. And there was someone who was willing to actually level the playing field as such. And education is about opportunity as well. So it wasn't just about kind of giving people the resources directly in sense, but it was about giving people that chance to succeed and that opportunities to succeed. Another thing which I saw in my lifestyle growing up is actually the explosion of people going to university from different backgrounds. My elder brother is 7 years older than me, and he was the first in kind of my family's generation to go to university, which is something that I think it just shows and it recognises actually that it was a Labour government that gave opportunity to families like mine, and that's why I decided to connect with the Labour Party.
You made political history in becoming the country's youngest cabinet member at local government level. Tell us a bit about your rise into the political life in Brent.
Yeah, so I stood for local election in Brent for the first time in 2010, so that's about 10 years ago now. I was 24 at the time, so I'm showing my age now. But really, as I got elected, at the time I was working supporting disabled people across the country as well. So I work for a charity called Aspire, who support people with spinal cord injuries. And I became really passionate about health and social care and disability and the issues that affect people who have a disability. And then from there, I think the opportunity came up actually to look deeper at the council and specialise in a certain area. So I became the cabinet member for adult social care at that time in 2012. Which actually gave me a chance to look at the issues that I was supporting disabled people with on a day-to-day basis at my work with the charity, and actually implement some of those policies locally to support disabled people in Brent. So actually it was a great pleasure and honour for me really to get that chance and get an opportunity to actually change people's lives in the local area that I live, and taking that campaign experience to find out what works well and what could work better for people. So to become a cabinet member in 2012, especially for adult social care, which is seen as quite a tough portfolio area at local government level, because it is the highest spending area at local council level, and a lot of the work that councils do have shifted considerably as cuts have hit councils to actually supporting the most vulnerable. So it's an area that I've had a great honour in supporting and leading on.
Excellent. You mentioned about you being a practicing Hindu. Tell us a bit about your volunteering experience with the Stanmore Hindu Temple, and has this influenced your work?
Definitely. So one thing I will say is that it also helped to shape me and become a more confident person as well. So my father actually was a trustee at the Stanmore Temple, which is in the London Borough of Harrow, actually. So next door to where we are in Brent. And I volunteered extensively there, whether it was just helping and supporting in the kitchen, at community events, or also in helping with things like decorations for festivals. But as I kind of grew more into politics, the temple asked me to help and support them in helping out when we had key visitors or key politicians, or also to have key campaign asks for local issues that the temple wanted to resolve. So actually it helped me grow as an individual, and also helped me to gain that confidence. But it was actually all embedded within the local community as well. So it's been great. I still worship at the temple. And it has really shaped my life, and also continues to play a strong role in mine and my family's life.
You are currently overseeing Brent's year as London Borough of Culture. What do you intend to achieve, and how would you like the rich cultural heritage of the Gujarati community be showcased during this year's celebration?
Well, Brent is, we've mentioned it time and time again about its diversity, but one of the things about Brent is that we want the world to know about it. So one of our main aims and objectives from the London Borough of Culture was to amplify the voice of Brent, and make sure that it's an area that people know about across the world. And we've got great heritage across the borough. We've been including all our local stakeholders in the London Borough of Culture. So if you look at our opening event, Rise, which was in January to launch the Year of Culture, we had a fantastic story played out on stage here just in front of Wembley Stadium, which really involved the local community. We had a piece which was from the Neasden Temple, for example, who were able to tell their story of coming into the borough. It was a real celebration of migration and the different communities we have in Brent. And one of the things that I want to see from the London Borough of Culture, and what we have seen already from the London Borough of Culture, is that what we don't want is for different events or different projects to be standalone projects on their own. We don't want projects where we have Gujarati projects just for the Gujarati community, or Afro-Caribbean projects just for the Afro-Caribbean community, and so on and so on. What we want to see is different communities and cultures learning about each other and embracing each other, so that we can bring different communities together. So what I hope to see for the Gujarati community in terms of London Borough of Culture is that integration. So it is that mixing with other communities, but also making sure that other communities recognise the story and the journey of the Gujarati community, which is what this project is about, with the archiving and making sure that we capture those experiences from Gujaratis living in Brent today, and really make sure that we celebrate, that we embrace, and together we learn to appreciate each other's cultures as well.
You were talking about the different communities in Brent. Can you you say something about it? What is important for Brent? Why Brent?
Yeah, so I mean, Brent, as I, you know, I'm obviously biased because I live and I grew up here. But one thing that you'll find about Brent is that we've got such a great cultural mix. You'll never see kind of you know, a particular community or in terms of statistics or numbers actually dominate in terms of the amount of population we have. We have a complete mix of different communities and cultures in Brent, living here and working here today. And one of the things that is so important, if you look around the world today, if we look at the division that is there across the world, we look at what's going on in America, or we look at you know, Brexit, for example, as well. We're seeing an increase across the world, I think, and it's really dangerous of that division. And what we want to make sure is that we don't have that in Brent. And the only way to achieve that is to get people together and also make them understand and recognise each other. And I think we probably take it for granted if you've grown up and lived here in this country, going to school in this country, where you know, someone's sitting in a desk next to you and actually you don't really care where they've come from. They're studying the same books as you. And they're in the same classroom as you, learning from the same teacher as you. But actually, it's quite easy as you grow older for some of those divisions to be inserted and to creep up. And what we want to do is combat those negative influences and show the positive difference that different communities can make, and that it's a positive thing to be celebrated. And culture can be described as the glue that can help to bind all those different communities together.
But again, could you outline a little bit about the different communities who live in Brent?
Yeah, so we've got a great story to tell in terms of the communities that have come through to Brent. So very early on, I think the first migrants that came to the UK would have been to Brent. We've still got a high Irish community in the Kilburn and Dollis Hill areas around Cricklewood. Around the 70s, obviously 70s and 80s, we've seen continually with the Windrush generation who have settled and decided to call Brent their home. And in the 80s, you saw particularly a huge wave of migration from East Africa, from the Indian community, where things were very unsettled in Kenya and in Uganda, and you saw a wave of migration towards the UK. Going further to today, actually, because you've got some of the emerging communities from Eastern Europe, from Romania, from Poland, and also we've had a refugee crisis in areas such as Syria, for example, and Brent has decided to take Syrian families and help and support and accommodate those children and families as well. So it's a real mixed picture of migration across the borough, which tells a real global story, really. And I think one of the telling things in Brent is that you know, it doesn't matter where these crises have occurred. You know, in the 90s we saw a spike in loads of people coming from Somalia as well. Brent has made sure that people can safely live in the borough and call it their home, and people have settled here and have stayed here, and I hope that cohesion continues to go on in the future.
You just previously, I think you wanted to show the diversity as something positive. Could you a little bit talk about that?
So one of the things that's really struck home during the London Borough of Culture is actually something that came from one of our community advisors, who described actually Brent in a nutshell, really. So they described themselves sitting on the upper deck of a London bus, going from south of the borough to north of the borough, and in that same journey they could pass churches, temples, mosques, community centres, and obviously the commercial outlets, the shops, the local town centres. Actually, it is quite humbling to actually see all the different range, all the different parts of the world in one place in Brent, and to see it as a positive. You know, we live in Brent as a community peacefully, and when you see areas across London or across the world where in the past we've had issues such as riots on the streets, Brent seems to stick together, and the community seems to stick together as well, and combat some of those negative aspects that we see elsewhere. And I think part of that has to be because actually we're just used to seeing that difference and embracing it. And what we hope to do in 2020 as a Borough of Culture is actually celebrate and embrace that, and also give that chance and opportunities to bring communities further together.
Our project is focusing on the roots and changes in the Gujarati community. How do you feel Gujaratis have contributed to Brent?
So in a great way. I mean, one of the things that we've celebrated for our Year of Culture, for example, was the Grundwick strikes led by Jayaben Desai, who's a great Gujarati pioneer from the borough. And in our opening event, Rise, we featured heavily because actually what that strike did was it set the way for migrant workers and their rights across the country. And we can find ample examples of Gujaratis in Brent who have taken action, but also that's led to national change and the way that the whole country works in general. Also in the world of business, for example, so the contribution made in some of our town centres and also some of the large businesses across the country, especially at the moment around the construction industry. You'll find that actually a lot of those are led by Gujarati families, and these are small businesses that have just grown and expanded as the years and decades have gone along, and many of those businesses have been passed, to other generations within the same family. So I think the economic contribution as well as the cultural contribution from the Gujarati community is something that we've seen in Brent, and its roots come from that upbringing, that family cohesion, and from the areas that the Gujarati families have come from.
You talked briefly about hate crime in Brent, and recently there have been lots of press reports about that. What is your stance and opinion about these hate crimes?
Yes, I mean, so hate crime is on the rise, I think globally, so not just here in the UK. And part of that is because obviously those differences being highlighted or exploited almost by even some of our media channels here in the UK. And Brent is not immune to that as well. So I remember a couple of years ago we had an example of anti-Semitism here in Brent, where we had Nazi graffiti sprayed in the Dollars Hill area on the pavement and on some of the walls. And I think for me what's more important is how we react as a community to that. And on that example, what we found was that actually the community held a vigil and on that day scrubbed the graffiti off just to say that actually this was not acceptable in our neighbourhood. And there was a show of solidarity from residents and the community that, whoever this person was or who this group was, this was not acceptable in our neighbourhood. So I think what's more important in terms of our Brent community is that when those incidents do happen, that we stamp it out and we show a stance against it, and we're firm and we call it out. And I think for me, for the Gujarati community as well, it's important that we show our solidarity when those events do happen. So anti-Semitism should not just be an issue for the Jewish community, or Islamophobia should not just be an issue for the Muslim community. but equality should be the value, and social justice should be the value that we all take up as an issue, and we should support everyone when they do experience those injustices collectively.
Were there any conflicts between different communities in Brent?
There will always be tensions, but I think our role, so me as a politician also, is to bring communities together. So I'll give you another example, I think. So last year there were really heightened tensions with the community when we look at what's happening in India and Pakistan, for example, with the Kashmir situation. And naturally, you'll get people from the Indian diaspora who are passionate from the Indian side, and people from the Pakistani community who are passionate on the other side, because it is a really tense community issue. And those tensions, you can feel it flare up. And it was around the time when we had the Independence Days for both nations as well, because they come on the 15th and 14th of August. And here in Brent, what we decided to do was actually hold flag raising ceremonies for both countries. So it was a way of us as local leaders, at least. We can't control the situation, what's happening now hundreds of miles away. But actually what we can do, and what we should aspire to do, and what we should absolutely try to do, is bring those communities together, so that we recognise actually we're in the UK and we're living side by side with each other. These difficult issues do happen across the globe, but actually, we live, we work, we study, we are with each other all the time. And if we divide over these issues, then actually we won't be able to live peacefully and harmony within the community that we're in today. So what I hope to do, and it doesn't matter if it's India or Pakistan, or if it's different countries over conflict at another time, our role as civic leaders is actually not to bring those tensions here, but it's to actually diffuse them and actually support communities and bring them together here in the UK.
You talked a lot about how the Gujaratis came to Brent in the 70s and 80s from Africa, and now they've been here almost 40 years. What changes have you seen in Brent over these last 40 years?
I think it's that integration really, and the fact that maybe the mainstream is recognising that Gujarati community as well. So when I talk about integration, I can probably talk about myself, to be honest, as well, and how my career in politics has transpired. So you're seeing Gujaratis in prominent positions, not just in politics really, but across business and across London and the UK. So you're seeing that integration, and you're seeing people actually settling in and getting that recognition and getting into those key roles and positions in every walk of life really. And then also, secondly, I talked about actually the mainstream actually recognising the Gujarati community as well. So when we find places like pubs and clubs and restaurants opening up, you'll find actually their menus sometimes accommodating traditional Gujarati tastes and food and cultures. So it's not just that you'll find that you'll go to a certain area and you'll find Gujarati shops there. You're finding places and you're finding items on those shop floors and on those menus in commercial restaurants in prominent places. And yesterday, actually, we were at an opening of a new coffee shop called Chaiwala, and Chaiwala means in India it's a tea cafe basically. And we're used to seeing in India people going around in tea carts, bringing tea to customers in the local area. But this shop opened on a high street on Kingsbury High Road, and they're opening up across different areas across the country, and I think they've got one opening in Knightsbridge soon as well. So it's not that we're just seeing these small shop outlets from our community just out in certain areas, but actually it's coming out to prominent locations so that it's not just tailoring for a certain Gujarati community, but actually all communities are experiencing those products and that culture.
You mentioned the word integration. Does it mean the immigrant community has to move in the mainstream or the host community, whatever that means?
No, definitely not. So I think it is about the merging of some of those values as well, and that recognition that different communities and cultures bring their ideas and values to the communities they settle in as well, and that needs to be recognised. You don't just switch off where you have come from. Both sides need adapting. It's almost like marriage, isn't it? You need to make compromises. The other side needs to make compromises, and hopefully at the end you achieve something better than it was at the beginning.
What kind of, we talk a lot about integration. Fair enough, we have integrated so well, but how have we changed the British society?
So hopefully, I think if we look at our values, and I go back to a lot of the work that I was doing with the temples, some of those values about togetherness, non-violence as well. It sounds basic, but actually it's a key core value of Hinduism and in Gujarat as well. And also that respect for one another as well. So we have brought those values with us, and we see that in the way that actually we live in the UK as well, and in the way that services are delivered. So you'll find that many in the Gujarati community live in multi-generational households, for example, and looking after your parents, looking after the elderly is seen as a key and core tenet of what we do in terms of our culture and tradition in Gujarat. And we're starting to see some of that actually recognised in this country as well. So when we look at what's happened with coronavirus, for example, there's been a huge focus on supporting, caring for the vulnerable, for the needy, for the elderly, and also making sure that as a community, as a society, if you know that someone is living on their own, making sure that you check up on them, making sure that you get any basic shopping or medication for them, so that they are able to live and fulfill their lives during this troublesome period as well.
That means immigration as such is rather an enrichment for the society.
Yes, so definitely. So I would. There is a lot of negativity.
In many areas and many countries, they discuss it. It's a challenge for us, for the society. But you just say the opposite.
Yeah. So I mean, challenges are there to be met. So when I talk about integration, both sides have to adapt, and you need to recognise that actually that integration does bring about positive contribution to your local area as well. And it's not just about the area that you live in, but actually it's the wider economy as well, and it's the wider way that the country moves as well. And everybody decides to come here for a reason, and hopefully that reason is positive. No one has in their mind that they will leave and upheave and their situation and their family for no particular reason and come here for no reason. You have to believe that people have good intentions when they want to live and commit to being here in our local community, and we should actually accommodate that. So we shouldn't see it as a negative thing or as a negative challenge. Challenges can be positive too. And we need to make sure that as a society we can take their experiences. Everyone brings something different to the table, and we should be able to take and embrace that, and hopefully get something positive out of it.
Can you give us an example of challenges? What you have to work with?
Yeah, so I mean, depending on where people have come from, they have certainly in terms of local services, we see it every day as well. So every area, every country has a different way of living and organising. The mundane things that may seem so little, like sorting your waste or sorting your bins and how you recycle. But actually, for us, it's about recognizing that and giving that education so that people can integrate, so that they know what to do, what the standards are, what the laws and regulations are in this country, and hopefully they can accommodate and be part of the society here today. Adaptation also means changes that we have seen over decades over this country when it comes to buildings, for example. So when I grew up in Brent, I regularly attended the Willesden temple, and beforehand the temple used to be a traditional Christian church. And at the time, there'd been objections about converting churches to temples, for example. But actually, if we look now, decades on, look at the positive contributions that temple has made to the local community. Even during this coronavirus period, they were providing food parcels to hospital staff and vulnerable people across London. And you find that actually, if we adapt and we learn to embrace, actually we can actually contribute and provide something positive for local areas. And change or challenges don't have to be negative. It may feel different, but actually there could be something positive that comes out of it.
We wanted to talk a bit about Ealing Road and how it has changed the whole setup of Brent with this immigrant community.
You have early on you talked about this bus journey through Brent or through West London. Maybe you can talk about this Ealing Road. What is something mystical there when you walk along and see the people and see the shops and everything?
No, Ealing Road is a very special place, I think, traditionally for Gujarati and Indian families here, not just in Brent to be honest, but all across the UK. It was seen as a place where you can get your goods and groceries and clothes and food, just like it is in India. So it felt very home to lots of communities all across the country who had an Indian or Gujarati heritage or background. And going down the street today, it is still continually changing. You're still seeing some of those more traditional shops come in, and now you're seeing some of those shops and restaurants opening with that modern twist as well. And coupled in with that, we've seen the new temple open up on Ealing Road as well, which is called a Sanatan Mandir, which means it's for all Hindu sects across the diaspora. So you're seeing that continual change. It's seen as a place where the Gujarati businesses settled and opened up to have Gujarati and Indian food, clothing and goods to other communities. But actually it's now a lot more universal than that. You find all communities going to Ealing Road and actually being comfortable with the shops and restaurants there. So some of those businesses have opened up more to wider communities, which is what I talked about before, really, about making sure that it's not just your offer to a single community, but it's that all communities can have a home, really, in what you're offering.
Black Lives Matter movement, its importance in Brent?
So Black Lives Matter is an incredibly important movement globally, but here in Brent as well. So we do have a large Afro-Caribbean community living in Brent, but also if we look at different black communities, we've got a large Somali community and large communities from other parts of Africa as well living in Brent. And what we've seen in America with George Floyd and the injustices in the system, I think we shouldn't be complacent in the UK, and these incidents, however large or small, are still examples of racism and institutional racism exists also in this country. And in Brent, so we have supported the black community throughout this and created an action plan, really. So what we didn't want in Brent was another review, because a review just leads to another review, and actually we've had many reviews in the past, and actually now is the time to actually take action. So we've consulted with black community leaders across the borough to draw up a community action plan which has come from them directly, so that all the different parts of the council and different sectors across the public sector can actually start to look at their policies and make sure that they are being equal and treating others equally throughout this. And also I'd like to probably reflect back on the point I made earlier about making sure that this is not just an issue for the black community or black people. This is something that I think that even the Gujarati community should be supporting, because some of those injustices and some of what we're seeing in terms of the inequality is stuff I think that any community can experience at any time, and we mustn't be complacent, and we should always show solidarity to those who are experiencing trouble at their time of need.
Did you experience racism yourself?
Personally, I don't think I've ever experienced much that's affected me. I have had people when I've campaigning saying racist things quite openly. Obviously not Labour supporters, but more probably fascist or BNP supporters. So you do get abuse on the doorstep when you are out, because as I said, those divisions and tensions are there, they're being exploited. For me, these are the amount of times that this happens compared to the positive experiences is quite minimal. So I do take things into perspective and do feel that actually when it does happen, it is out of ignorance and people not knowing much better really about what you stand for and what your values are, and what different communities can bring and offer to people. But also what I do experience is maybe not racism towards me, but people saying racist comments about other communities as well. And for me, it is about being firm and stamping that out and calling it out as well. So when you hear people saying things that are anti-Semitic or Islamophobic, although I'm not Jewish or a Muslim, I should treat it as though I'm being offended as well, because one day someone could be saying something about my community, and I wouldn't want anyone actually just taking that at face value and accepting it. So racism is still there in this country. It hasn't gone away, but it's just shown in different ways than maybe it has been in the past. And social media has exposed it a lot more as well, and technology means that we're able to film these incidents when they happen. So the George Floyd example is one where people had been talking about police brutality for many years, but actually it's been caught on camera now, so there's no escaping it, or there's no question about are they lying, or are they saying something wrong, or trying to evade the issue. So I think it's still there, and we need to make sure we continue to battle it.
Did you discuss any measurements towards the police force in Brent? How to treat racism?
Yeah, so to be honest, it's something that the Met Police are completely aware of, given what's happened across the globe. So in terms of the local approach or the council's approach, the Met Police is a function that is not controlled by the council, but we work closely with the Metropolitan Police, and they are increasingly aware of the tensions that are there in the community, and to be fair, have adapted their practices as well, especially in the current time. But we want to make sure that continues, so all of those negative practices towards that we have seen towards different communities, such as the targeting of stop and search, for example, We just need to make sure that it's not that they're treating people differently because of the heightened sensitivity, but they need to make sure that that alertness or that sensitivity continues even when if it does get to the stage where the media is no longer concentrating on issues like Black Lives Matters. They need to make sure that they're still looking at it as if they've got a close lens on them, so that they take these issues seriously.
At a very young age, you have reached the pinnacle of a political career, but you still have got so many years ahead of you to do wonders. I don't know what's happened with the London Assembly elections. Have they happened, or you're a member of the London Assembly now?
No. So in earlier this year, I was selected by party members, Labour Party members living in Brent and Harrow, to be their London Assembly candidate in Brent and Harrow, which is a real honour for me because, as I said, I've lived and grown up in Brent, and I've worked and volunteered in Harrow all my life, so it feels very local to me, and my motivations there were completely local. And I wanted to make sure that I was there to improve the services that are around me for me and the communities that I have grown up with all of my life. Those elections were due to take place in May 2020, but all elections have been postponed until next year, May 2021. So those elections will still take place. I'll still be the candidate, but they will be in May 2021 rather than May 2020.
What will you change when you're elected? I'm sure you will be elected.
Yeah, so I've got some hopefully excellent ideas to really take forward and make sure that the community is represented. One is that importance that I want to place on young people. So if we look at what we've seen across this country over the last decade, really, with the trebling of tuition fees, the cuts to education maintenance allowance, and also Brexit, to be honest, because young people were very much against Brexit. It's easy for young people to feel that actually politicians don't care, or the state doesn't care, or the government doesn't care. So one thing that I do want to do is introduce Brent and Harrow's first young people steering group, and my idea for this is to have a collection of young people who are there to actually report back to. So when we have policies going through the mayor's office or even through government or local government, I have a reference group to actually say this is what the council is planning, or this is what the mayor is planning, and survey those members and really get their ideas about what they want to change and what they would like to see happen in their local community, so that actually they have a stake and they are having a say in what is happening across their local area and across the country as well. So that's one of my key landmark pledges. The second is, I think, that idea of equality, and one of the things that I said throughout, even when I was trying to be selected as Labour's candidate, was that I would be a candidate for all communities. So recognising that yes, I am a British Gujarati Hindu, but also that when I go to represent communities in the council chamber or at City Hall, I need to make sure that I am also representing all communities in those chambers and provide a platform for them. So one of the things that I've always said is that I will not pit communities against each other, and I will promote social cohesion across those communities and tackle all forms of hate crime. And that doesn't mean just crimes against particular races or religions, but also if we look at things like LGBT plus communities as well, making sure that any sort of disadvantage or hatred across those communities, including disability, are tackled and championed and represented well across Brent and Harrow, and that my local residents are having that stake and having that say in our local community.
You are a very good role model for any young aspiring Gujarati youngster. What advice would you give them?
I think the one thing I would say is always take forward what you are passionate about. So even if it goes against the norm, even if it's not traditionally accepted, or it's outside of your comfort zone, if it's something that you are passionate about, you can make it happen, and you just need to persevere, but also make sure that when you are going forward, to have that selflessness as well. I feel that, as a Hindu, I'm a believer in karma as well. So if you do good deeds, then good things will eventually happen. And as long as you take those positive values, as long as you carry out what you want to do with the best intentions, then hopefully you'll be able to achieve what you want to achieve. And also politics, you need to have a bit of thick skin as well. So you'll always have opposition, whether that's from opposition parties, or when I alluded to some of the comments that you might receive on your social media or on the doorstep as well. But actually that opposition is there, and you can challenge that, and you don't necessarily have to take it to heart as well. Because if you do, you need to realize that your own stability, your own mental stability, has an impact on how you are able to fulfill your role as well. As long as you have that confidence in yourself, and are self-confident, and can take forward the issues that you want to take, and take forward your passions, then that is all that should matter.
Your connections with the temples and a lot of organizations, do you think that has boosted Labour's prospects of reconnecting with the Hindu community?
So in the last 4 or 5 years, you've seen, if you look at how the elections have formed over the last few years, you'll find that there's definitely been a disconnect between the Hindu and Gujarati population and the Labour Party. And part of that has to do with representation. So when you see Hindus looking at the parties that they have in Parliament, and they don't see those representatives, and they don't see people from their communities coming forward, then that tells and that speaks volumes, really. So I hope to be that representative, and as I said, my values have not changed since I spoke about what I said about that investment into social justice, education, schools, and the NHS. So I will not, I cannot change my party, because that is to the core of me and my values. So I have a role to play, I recognise, in connecting the party back to the community, and for me, it is about listening to that community as well, and making sure that the issues that they raise are taken on board by the party and the wider party structures as well. Representation, as I said, is a key part of that. As if people start to see that there are aspiring Gujarati politicians on the Labour Party side coming forward as well, then they will be able to better connect with that. But moving on from that, it's about how much further the party can look at the issues that are affecting Gujaratis in the UK today, and take those issues forward as well.
What is your vision for Brent?
For Brent, it's difficult to talk about anything without addressing the coronavirus situation at the moment. So in the immediate term, I think it's about getting Brent and our residents back on our feet again. If you look at what's happened over the last few months, Brent has some of the highest numbers on the furlough scheme. So I think some of the basics, such as getting people into sustainable work again, and making sure that they have that income so that they can support themselves and their families, is going to be crucial in the immediate term. But my vision for Brent is to have that equality of opportunity. And if I look at my story and my life in Brent, having the opportunity, going to Brentcroft Primary School, and hopefully next year being at City Hall, I think to many people maybe growing up around me and my family around the 80s, it would have been difficult to foresee that someone from our family or someone from our generation could be in a prominent role in politics in the City of London. And for me, it's about giving people the same opportunities that I have enjoyed to get to position where I am and hopefully where I am going. At the moment, for me, it feels that some of those opportunities are fewer than they have been when I grew up. So my vision for Brent and probably across the country is hopefully to see that boost again in investment into education and employment, really, so that families can be supported and young people can be supported to get the qualifications that they need, regardless of their upbringing and where they have come from or what their personal financial situation is, so that they can achieve and aspire to the best of their abilities.
Is there also a role for culture in the vision for Brent?
Definitely. So in terms of a cultural vision for Brent, it all stems from the work that we've started to do with London Borough of Culture. So first of all, we do want to make sure and recognise and amplify Brent as a borough and really put Brent on the cultural map. What we're seeing across the globe, whether it's the music sector, if we look at the work and the traditions in Brent from the reggae industry, for example, they've had such a global role to play in the music industry, but that's not really recognised. So for me, it's about getting Brent that recognition and that platform so that people know about it. And also that will hopefully help instill pride in the borough as well, so that people growing up and living in the borough really connect and really can be proud to shout about where they are and where they have come from. And also hopefully other people will look at that and say, actually, Brent is a brilliant place and I want to be there and call it my home as well. And the second thing is really about that opportunity and education in the arts. So the London Borough of Culture programme really it does have a primary focus on culture and the arts. And if we look at that industry, Brent has such rich talent, but needs that support. Some of the artists in our borough need that support to go to the next level. So we want to provide them that platform and that opportunity as well, so that they can be the leaders of tomorrow as well.
We are still in this COVID-19 affected situation. Do you think there's a need for a special support? You talked about artists, about people working in culture.
Yes.
Is there anything what the borough of Brent does?
So before the lockdown started, if we look across London, for example, culture was one of the fastest growing sectors in the economy. So this has had a massive impact on the culture scene, because individuals and cultural venues have been unable to obviously open their doors to people, and a lot of people working in the cultural industries are freelancers and rely on projects coming in to support themselves. And we recognise that as the London Borough of Culture as well. We've been affected directly because we haven't been able to put mass participation events or public gatherings together, and there's still uncertainty about how that happens. But what we have been able to do is create a series of videos and podcasts to really amplify and tell our story in the borough, and also hopefully help inspire our young people. So some of our video interviews that we've been publishing have been with famous people who have grown up in Brent and are working and are in the cultural industry as well. And hopefully that will inspire people to do that. We've also opened up a second wave of the Cultural Fund as well, so that people who are freelancers and want to take forward any projects or initiatives on their own have been able to apply for funding to make sure that they have not only that financial stability to keep them going, but also can contribute positively in terms of the local cultural programme, so that residents can also enjoy what they're offering as well. So what we've seen in Brent is probably the cultural sector adapting to the coronavirus situation, because it hasn't gone away yet, and and we're unsure about what we can do physically. But actually, we've adapted to make sure that the culture sector still continues to thrive, and we've been supporting it throughout.
Just one last question. I want to go back to your roots. Do you feel you have changed from your ancestors?
I think definitely the lifestyle and the lifestyle that I live today in London is very different from my ancestors, and that's because you take on board and you're shaped about what's around you and where you've grew up in. So obviously I've grown up in a very different environment to my ancestors. When I spoke about my ancestors going from ship and boat from India to Kenya, I've not had that hardship. I was born in Central Middlesex Hospital. I've been lucky that my parents, when house prices were quite low, bought our family home in the 80s. So I've had a roof over my head. I've had a stable roof over my head. And I haven't been, I haven't had the need to move from country to country and able to support me growing up and my family being sustainable as well. So my experiences are very different to my ancestors' experiences. And that's natural, but for me it's about embracing that and taking their experiences on board with the way I live my life as well, and making sure that we don't completely lose their values as well, and incorporating it into my life. And I do thank them for instilling those values into me, and language has been a key part of that really. And even when I go out campaigning or canvassing today, for example, if we're out on the doorstep campaigning for the party or for votes, you'll often find communities out there like my grandparents who still don't speak English. So actually, to be able to communicate with them in Gujarati about the local issues that they want to take forward has been well, quite a gift really that they have given to me, so that I can connect better in the role that I'm doing today as well.